Sid Banks writes these books, lovely books, called The Enlightened Gardener, if you wanted to order one online. It's just a nice story, right? And in his books, all his books have a similar theme. If you read one, you've read them all. But the theme is that the young man with a problem, or the young woman with a problem, comes across a wise character who at some point says to them, well, the reason you have all these problems is because you have not yet seen the truth. People think. And the young explorer goes, oh my God, now everything's different. And I would read this book and go, why? You ever heard the expression, I don't know who discovered water, but I guarantee you it wasn't a fish? We live in a world of thought. And it can take a while to see how that affects everything that we do. But the beautiful thing is the minute you see even a little bit of how you can only experience your own thinking, you can't experience anything out there. You can experience your thinking about what's out there. We couldn't have a talk about money tonight, but we could have a talk about our thinking about money. Right? We couldn't talk about success, but we could have a great chat about our thinking about success. We couldn't talk about religion. We can't talk about spirituality. We can't even talk about stress. We can just talk about our thinking about them. That's just the way the game is set up. Now, where that gets incredibly profound is when you're trying to change your experience. Because if I think my experience is coming at me from the outside, like I'm feeling this way because of what you said to me, I'm feeling this way because of the way you're looking at me right now, that's really mean, right? I'm feeling this way because of that money I had to give you. Right? I'm feeling this way because of the pain in my shoulder, in my back, in my leg, in my neck, in my throat, in my eyes, wherever. I'm feeling this way because of something outside of me. Then if I have any common sense at all, how am I going to try and make things better? I'm going to try and change the outside, right? That's just common sense. If the problem is out there, that is where I am going to go to fix it, unless I am an idiot. Now, the problem isn't that I'm an idiot. The problem isn't that's not where it's actually coming from. Right? It would be like going to the movies and seeing a character in the movie about to make a mistake and going up to the character and going, don't do it. It's not going to work. I mean, you could try. It'd be quite funny. But that's not how it works, because that's not how movies work. If you even wanted to change it up there, you'd have to go to the projection booth. You'd have to go to the back of the room, and you'd have to make a change out there. It's the only way you could do it, because that's where it's coming from. And in the same way, if we believe in the disease model, the germ theory of stress, right? That's the prevailing theory. I would say if there was a prevailing theory of stress in our culture, it's the germ theory of stress. And the germ theory of stress says stress is outside us, and certain places have more of it than others. Right? So a friend of mine does a drawing, a really nice drawing of this. And so he draws the office, and there's a lot of stress germs in the office, because so many people catch stress when they're in the office. And he draws a park, and there's not many stress germs in the park, because very few people catch stress when they're in the park. And then, there's small children and a lack of sleep, and there's a lot of stress germs there. And, then there's lovely, fluffy, pink bunny rabbit tails, and they have very little stress around them, right? And the world, we got to be careful. We got to watch where we step, or we're going to step in some stress. Ooh, man, I'm not getting between those two. That's stressful. I'm not going to that country. I'm not going to deal with that problem. I don't want to look at what's going on over there. That's stressful, right? Hey, I got my own problems. It's not that we don't care. It's not that we aren't hardwired for compassion. It's that we think stress exists outside of us and we can catch it. That's how we talk about it. Right? You go to a doctor, one of the tests that they will give you to see how stressed you are is it will ask you a list of questions. I remember doing this at one point, being given this test by a doctor. And it was, have you been divorced within the last year? Have you moved home within the last year? Have you gone to school or changed schools within the last year? Have you had an argument with your spouse within the last 2 weeks? And I mean, I passed with flying colors. I mean, I got them all right. And most of us do, because that's kind of the nature of the human experience. That's normal. But there's a big difference between the normal and the natural. Natural is what is innate. Natural is what's there regardless of where we grew up, who we grew up with, what they taught us about life, what we learned, what we saw. That's innate. What's normal is what most people in the culture kind of vaguely agree on. So it is normal to find life extremely stressful and to find the best way you can to cope with that. That kind of stress is not natural. It's not part of the design. And the reason that we miss it is because of the germ theory of stress, the outside-in theory of stress. We interpret the signal of stress to mean I need to make a change out there. I need to change my relationship, change my partner, or if I'm really enlightened, I need to change myself in relation to my partner. Right? I need to change my financial situation. I need to change my job. I need to change my attitude. I need to change this. I need to change that. I need to change the planet. The planet's not right. If I could get the planet right, then I'd be okay. Changing the world is the worst possible way I can imagine to try and change how you feel. It's a great thing to do. And when it comes out of compassion, it's actually amazing what you can do. But if you're doing it to feel better, good luck to you. Because chances are you're going to burn out if you haven't already. Because the more in you get, the more stressed you get. Because there's a lot of stress germs in the Greek banks right now. There's a lot of stress germs in Rwanda. There were a lot of stress germs during the riots, right? So I'm going to just do my best not to deal with that, or I'm going to deal with it as best I can, but I'm going to deal with it like this, right? I'm going to deal with it all macho. We've got to stop this because it's out there. And that's what we know to do. It's not wrong, it's not bad, it's not, of course, look, if there's action to be taken, you take it. But not to make yourself feel better, not to make yourself feel less pain. So I have been talking to people about this for about 3-4 years now. 3 years, I'd say. And one of the things that I started to notice when I started to just share this simple fact, and there's a little bit more. That wasn't it, but that's a lot of it. But you share this simple clarity, this simple truth. We experience our thinking. We don't experience the world. The mind is not a camera. The mind is a paintbrush. People started having changes show up in their life that were way out of line with what I said. In fact, they would often say, I'm not really sure what you said, but I feel great. And I got curious about that. I tried to understand that. I had anorexics who stopped being anorexic even though we hadn't gotten around to treating their anorexia. I had all sorts of things like that happen. And I'm not a healer, I'm not a mystic, I know that, right? So I thought, well, what's going on here? I'm a little more pragmatic than that. And one day a guy, we'd only had a couple of chats, and it was a little thing. It wasn't like a dramatic thing. But I remember he said to me, he said, what did you do to me? And I said, what do you mean? Because we'd had a couple of chats. And he said, well, I've been trying to stop biting my nails for 20 years. I haven't bitten my nails once in the last 2 weeks. And I suddenly got it. And I don't know why I got it in that moment. That's the nature of insight. It comes when it comes. Right? The best thing you can do if you want to catch a bus, if you don't know the bus schedule, stand at the bus stop. Best thing to do if you want an insight, you want a new thought, and you don't know where it is, hang out in a quiet mind for a little while. Quiet mind and a beautiful feeling. That's the bus stop for insight. It's the opposite of stress, right? Because stress is a noisy mind and a horrible feeling. So you may as well just at least go there. So for whatever reason, in that moment, I got quiet. And suddenly I was like, oh my God, I think I get this. And here's how I explained it to him. I said, imagine that you lived in a world that was filled with evil, poisonous dragons. Nasty, not Disney dragons, like nasty ass, fire-breathing, scratching, poisonous dragons. Now, naturally, living in that world, you would have to build up some pretty intense protection against the dragons. Now, some people would build their castle walls against the dragons out of money. If I can just get enough money, then the dragons won't be able to get me. And so that's why they are the way they are around money. Successful or unsuccessful, they're building that castle wall out of money. Some people try to do it out of success and fame. If I just get famous enough, if I can just be an important enough person, then the dragons won't get me. Right? Some people try to do it with love. If I can just find one person to love me, then the dragons can't get me. Right? And it kind of almost sort of works until they don't love me right. Or they stop loving me, or they start loving someone else. Right? And then suddenly I'm exposed to the dragons again. The money was keeping me perfectly safe. I'm fine. But then suddenly the money wall doesn't look so stable, and now I'm exposed. I'm really famous. It's fine. But then suddenly my fame is waning. My star is waning. I'm being asked to be on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, which is like death, right? And I'm like, oh no, my castle walls are crumbling. Well, at some point, either you give up on your castle, or your castle gives up on you. And that's life, right? For most people, at some point it doesn't work out quite the way you'd hoped. And at that point you get bit and scratched by the dragon. And it hurts. That poison burns in your bloodstream. It feels like tension in your shoulders and a pain in your head, like a throbbing headache, and kind of a shortness of breath and tightness. And it feels a lot like this thing that they call stress. And so the best you can do is take the edge off. So maybe I find that drinking helps with the poison, right? It's a traditional poison cure. I never actually knew if it was because it worked or you just got drunk, but that's what they did. You try distracting yourself. You watch a lot of TV. You go shopping, right? Shopping's a great one. You have a lot of sex with random strangers. However you do it, right? We all have our favorites. But you find some way of dealing with it. Now imagine all of that. And then one day, you wake up. And to your amazement, you realize, categorically, there are no dragons. What happens to your life? It gets different. Because you're not going to really work quite so hard to build those castle walls, because it's hard work. Don't let anyone tell you it isn't. You're not going to work quite so hard to build those castle walls if there's nothing you need to protect yourself from. You're not going to need to keep doing the things that help you deal with the pain of the dragon bites if there are no dragons and no bites. And suddenly, things that you may have done, habits you may have had for years, are gone just like that. And there's a lot of precedents for this. In Vietnam, that was one of the first wars where they had studies where it was an extraordinary number. I don't know the accurate numbers because we're never going to know them, but in some studies as high as 50% of American soldiers in the Vietnam War were hooked on heroin during the war. May point to why things didn't go so well, I don't know. Of that number, less than 10% did heroin when they came back home. Without treatment programs, without anything else. They just weren't, in their minds probably, where the stress germs were anymore. Now, those who had post-traumatic stress disorder still were, but that kind of points to the problem with the whole stress germ theory, is why do you still feel stressed when you're not there anymore? Oh, well, it's because it got inside me now. I'm infected. Well, okay, that would be an explanation, and then you do things to try and root out the infection, like stress management techniques and relaxation techniques and hypnosis and self-hypnosis and meditation, and that would hopefully get some of that poison out, and it kind of works really well. If I wasn't so tired from meditating, I would feel great, But the minute you see that the only thing that can get you, because it's the only thing you can experience, is a thought, it's not so scary. Do something. This is an odd experiment. Try and tickle yourself and see if you can make yourself laugh. Go on, do it. Not each other. Now, I had to check to make sure nobody was laughing because apparently, psychologically, only schizophrenics laugh when they tickle themselves. I needed to do the check. But it doesn't work. We're hardwired not to be able to tickle ourselves. There are other psychological experiments they've done with scary voices, scary noises. And they took students and they tried to scare them, and they had the students record scary things and say scary things in scary voices. And what they found is we are physiologically hardwired not to be able to be scared by our own voice, even when it's disguised and saying something scary. I'm going to get you, Michael. Right? It doesn't work. Somehow inside us, we recognize that it's us, and it's fine. We actually have that same hardwiring. Now, I can't prove this, but observably, when it comes to our mental health. The minute you see that it's your own thought that's scaring you, it's not so scary. Now, people have at different times different levels of thought recognition, right? So one of the things when they do programs based on just this simple understanding in prisons, one of the things that the prisoners are often very surprised at is that the person at the front of the room will acknowledge that they have criminal thoughts. Right? How many people here at some point have had the thought, I'm going to kill him? Right? How many of you did it? Go on, be honest. Right? Well, the people in prison had that thought, and it didn't seem like a thought. It seemed true. It seemed important. It seemed like something that had to be acted on. They had a very low level of thought recognition at that time. One of the things that lowers thought recognition is the experience of stress. The more stressed you are, the harder it is to actually see that it's your own thinking. The less stressed you are, the more obvious it is. At higher levels of thought recognition, there's a whole bunch of things that just aren't stressful to you, even though they are to other people. Right? Because you can kind of see there's nothing there. It might not be the ideal situation. It might not be going the way you want. You might not want to be sick when you're sick. You might wish you had more money, but it is what it is. And you kind of get that the only thing that could scare you is your own thinking about it. But then there'll be something else. Right? However good our thought recognition, there'll always be something that doesn't look like thought. I've never talked to anyone as a coach who hasn't at some point said to me some variation on, well, I get that that's thought. Right? And I get that that's thought, and I get that that's thought, but this is real. Right? And it's usually to do with money or their partner. Those are or their kids. Those are the most common ones. But it's just to the extent that we see how it works, it changes it. We don't have to do anything about it. Right? There's a story that, as far as I know, is true, that in the 1880s, the Lumiere cinema in Paris, they showed one of the first moving pictures, and it was of a train coming into a station. And half the audience got up and ran out of the theater screaming. Bless you. Now, we kind of know that it's just a movie. They didn't have that level of consciousness of thought recognition at that point. Now, of course, we're quite sophisticated. We have quite high levels of movie recognition. Well, it's the same with thought. At the lowest level of thought recognition, it's like drawing a picture of a monster and then going, ah! But at a higher level of thought recognition, we go, ooh, scary picture of a monster. Cool. And as you start to see, and there's no trying here, you will see what you see. You will start to see yourself scaring yourself, angering yourself, making yourself anxious, thinking all sorts of worry thoughts about the future. Worrying? Worrying's great, right? Worrying is actually a verb, right? You worry a bead, you push it around in a circle, right? We worry thoughts in our head. We take one thought, or one little series of thoughts, and we run it and 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 run it. It's like taking a pot of tea and putting the tea bag in and dunking it, leave it. But the tea gets pretty foul. And so do we. Right? And the reason that we keep doing that is we don't see that it's just a bad habit. We think it's doing something. If we even get that it's us, right? Because at low thought recognition, it's nothing to do with you. It's the economy. It's my partner. It's my illness. It's whatever it is. But at a higher level of thought recognition, I kind of know it's my thinking, but it's important that I think this because it's going to keep me safe if I keep thinking about it. I'll get a solution if I keep going around in circles, which is about as logical as the old story about the guy who's out in front of his house, under the lights. He's going back and forth, and a couple neighbors come over. Hey, Bob, what's going on? Oh, God, I dropped my keys. I can't find my keys. Oh, we'll help. And pretty soon, half the neighborhood's there, and finally somebody thinks to go, well, where did you last see him? And he said, well, in my kitchen. They go, well, why are we looking out here? He goes, oh, the light's great out here. Right? Thinking that, you can somehow worry yourself well, it doesn't stand up to much scrutiny. And yet, we do it. There's another one, the guy's standing there spinning a tiger by its tail over his head. Real tiger. And somebody comes over to him and goes, what are you doing? And he goes, I'm keeping away the lions. And they go, this is Cheltenham. There are no lions. And he goes, see, it's working. Right? It's just superstition. Worry doesn't make anything go away. It's just a habit of thought. But until you see that, it kind of feels like, well, at least I'm doing something. Right? It feels better than not doing anything. So we keep doing it. So here's another little piece of this understanding that seems to really make a difference to people when they see it. The feeling of stress in your body, which, by the way, is very hard to feel if you're really stressed, because you're so used to being stressed that it just feels normal. But let me tell you what natural feels like. Okay? Those of you who've had babies, those of you who've seen babies, those of you who've been babies, you know that a baby at rest is not worrying about the German banks, the Greek banks, the American mortgage subprime rates, is just living in its innate well-being. That doesn't actually go anywhere. We can think ourselves as far away from it as we want, but the basic innate health in every human being, it's never gone anywhere. And that's the reason that these people could have these sort of like miracles happen in their life. Not because, ooh, look at me, look what I did, because they saw, oh my God, I think that's the problem. And suddenly they weren't so scared, because it's hard to get that scared about your own thinking when you see that it's just you doing it. And then that natural well-being, they suddenly felt it again. It hadn't ever gone anywhere. It hadn't ever got any less. That's just what it feels like to be alive. That's ever present, underneath the noise. It's like, I always like this example in England. People seem to get it here. Have you ever noticed that you can go weeks at a time without seeing or feeling the sun? Have any of you ever felt the need to call the local newspaper and go, oh my God, the sun's gone? Probably not, because you recognize at some level that it doesn't go anywhere. It's just sometimes there's a lot of stuff between us and it. Well-being is our nature, and we can think ourselves in and out of stress all day long. Now, here's what the feeling of stress is actually a signal for. It is not a call to action or arms unless there is a clear and present danger, in which case you won't experience it as stress, you'll experience it as energy. Right? I had a chance to work with a guy who's, he's sort of the go-to guy if you're being stalked and you're famous. Right? So this is the guy who does protection. He organizes protection for the rich and famous if they're being stalked. And he said 99.9% of what people call fear is worry, is stress. It's just a thought. He said in those rare cases that there is a real and present danger, people experience that energy completely differently. It actually makes them move. They actually get incredibly sharp. They actually have an amazing heightened sense of perception, and very often do extraordinary things. And we've all heard those stories. But the rest of the time, because fortunately our society is actually so safe that we most of us, unless you've been in a war zone or you've been somewhere like that, most of us have probably only been in a clear and present danger 5 to 10 times in our lives. So we don't have the reference points to tell the difference. And so we think, oh my God, this is a real emergency. Oh my God, this is a real emergency. Oh my God, this is a real emergency. I don't have enough money for French fries. And we don't have that kind of contrast frame that would make it easy to see, maybe that's all right. You know, maybe just for tonight, I'm good with just like, you know, a Coke. I don't know. And so we misinterpret that experience of stress, that feeling of stress, as I have to do something about my life. I need to make a change now. I need to make a change once and for all. I need to sort this out. I need to change my partner. I need to change my relationship. I need to change my financial situation. I need to change my job. I need to change the world. And I need to do it in the next 5 minutes. Right? Because that's how it feels when you're stressed. But it's actually no more, no less than a check engine light. Right? You know the check engine light in a car? Comes on when there's a problem with the engine. The engine's still going, but it comes on to let you know there's a problem. Now, if you've got a car and you take good care of it, you know that when the check engine light comes on, you take a break as soon as you can and you check the engine. You see what it needs. If it needs more oil, you put more oil in. If it needs a tune-up, you give it a tune-up, whatever it needs. Now, the way that we treat stress in our culture, the normal way to handle stress, would be the equivalent of the check engine light coming in our car and us going, damn light. And then if it keeps coming on, we unscrew it and take the bulb out because it's just driving us nuts. Or we just tape it over if we can't be bothered, right? We make a bet with our friends how long we can drive with the check engine light before the engine stalls completely, right? The moment you start to feel stress, all it's saying is, hey, your thinking's out of whack and you are caught up in it. That's it. You're thinking yourself unwell. Because we can only feel our thinking. If I'm having uncomfortable, unpleasant, stressful feelings, it just means I'm thinking unpleasant, stressful thoughts. And when I am out of my wisdom. I am out of touch. I'm away from the bus stop, right? I'm not where the good stuff's going to come in. And I'm just stuck in my memory trying to figure out the best way to do whatever I've got to do now based on the best way I've done it in the past. And that's probably not that great a way. Even if it worked before, it probably isn't going to work this way. And we've all got our own ways of knowing. We've all got our own little check engine lights, right? For some people, it's a feeling. They feel it in their bodies. That's the first place they notice they're stressed, right? That's your check engine light. Hey, your thinking can't be trusted right now. And it's looking real to you somehow. And just pull back a little and see what it looks like in the morning. See what it looks like in an hour. See what it looks like if you take a little break. Maybe now's not the time to have that final conversation about whether or not we're going to have babies. Right? Because if you do wait, if you do just give a pause, what will happen is you'll go back to a state of clarity. You'll go back to a quieter mind because that's the default. I have a radio show you can listen to. You can actually listen to it here. It's on heyhouseradio.com, 8 p.m. Thursdays in the UK is the one time you can listen to it here. And I had a caller who called into the show and said, Michael, thanks very much for taking my call. I just have a few things, 7 things that I want to get through. The first one is, and the second one is, and also I'd like help with this, and maybe could you, and I stalked her around like number 4. And I said, let me ask you a question. I said, if I gave you a bowl of murky water and I asked you to make it clear, how would you do it? And she said, I'd boil it. And I thought that made sense. She'd wind up with a bowl of very hot, murky water with bubbles in it, but it made sense. But if you actually want to take a bowl of murky water and make it clear, how do you do it? You just let it settle. And it works because the nature of water is clear. The nature of mind is clear. The nature of beingness is well. And if you just give yourself a little bit of time, and it doesn't take a lot, you don't need years, you don't need months, you don't need days, you don't even need minutes, you need a moment. And you're right back to clear. And in your clarity, you have access to all the well-being and all the wisdom and all the common sense of the ages. And you can actually live more and more and more of your life from that place. And when you do, you don't get that stressed. You might have stress in the moment, but it doesn't turn into chronic stress. You might get a bit down, but it doesn't turn into depression. You might get a little frustrated with something, but it doesn't turn into anger management issues. Because you kind of know, oh, it's just my thinking. It'll pass. And you drop right back into the clarity, and right back into the well-being, and right back into the wisdom. Now, I'm torn here, so I'm going to ask you a question. I should be stopping in a minute, but I'd also like to open up a space for questions. Do we have time for maybe 5 minutes of questions? Yeah, sure. Okay, so there's going to be people with microphones, so if you have a question, please raise your hand. When I call on you, wait for the person with the microphone to sprint lithely in your direction so that we can all hear you. So anything you'd like to ask or share, just based on what we said, right behind you.
Hello.
Hello.
It seems that your kind of coaching style has changed in the last few years. And I suppose my question is, if someone's coming to you, because if someone's gone to you like they want to, I don't know, make their business better,
Yeah.
do you still kind of coach them with things to do that, or do you, is your coaching kind of
Okay, so and if I'm going to reinterpret the question,
yeah.
and if I reinterpret it incorrectly, tell me. But my understanding of the question, and it's a great question, is if somebody comes to me with a business issue, do I help them with the business issue, or do I talk to them about dragons and stuff? Yeah, basically. Okay, great. So here's actually, I was just speaking to a group in Sweden 2 nights ago, and brought a woman up on stage, and on a whim, really, I blindfolded her. And got to do something, right? I got to keep it fun for me. So, and I said to the group, and it was a high stage like this, I said, okay, who's got advice on how to get her off stage? Right? And people had various strategies. We could, 2 of us could take her and lift her. We could move a chair in, guide her down. We came up with a lot of great strategies for success. And then I took her blindfold off, and she walked off stage. So if I'm working with anyone, especially somebody in business, chances are if they're in business, they know the business side better than I do. But if they're coming to me, it's because for whatever reason, they can't see. They're not in touch with that common sense and wisdom that is our nature, but when we're stressed, we're off in our thoughts and we don't have access to it. They calm down, the blindfold comes off, they know what to do. So that would be.
Yeah, that's good. Gives me goosebumps.
Cool. Thanks. 2 more, if they're out there. Yes.
Thank you, Michael. What do you consider to be the most important skill and the most important quality of a good coach, of an excellent coach to be?
Not just a good coach, an excellent coach. Skill and quality, okay. This would be the moment where I say, if you're interested in learning to be a coach, come to Super Coach Academy in Los Angeles. Please speak to Michael or Nigel in the front row after the event. Having said that, I would say that the most important quality in a coach is probably grounding. And I don't mean grounding as in, I am grounded. I mean, your understanding of life speaks through you every time you open your mouth. And if you have a deep, profound understanding of life, it doesn't matter what you say, people get that. If you have a sort of all over the place grounding understanding of life, no matter how brilliant what you say, that's what will come across. And so then, if there was a particular skill that I would say, that skill would be to know when to shut up and when to speak. And that's something that you pick up by coaching. Yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you. One more if it's out there. Yes, right there.
Thank you. I'm not trying to be clever here, but what do you
Neither
do?
am I, but I still,
What do you do when you calm down and the dragons are still there?
You come down to the dragons, they're still there. Well, that's sort of like asking, I'll tell you again a true story from a client session. I was coaching this guy, and before the session started, we were just chatting. And he said, oh, let me tell you about this dream I had. And he said, it's wild, man. I was on a private jet with this rock star and Saddam Hussein. And we were like flying to pick up some hookers in Russia. And I'm not making this up, right? And I suddenly realized, like somewhere over New York, that Saddam Hussein is sleeping with the rock star's wife. And I'm feeling like really torn because I want to have a good time, but I feel I owe it to the rock star to let him know that like his wife is having sex with Saddam Hussein, and oh, it was awful. I woke up in a sweat. Okay, so then we had our coaching session, and actually, this guy who works in the public eye, and it came out, just became apparent in our chatting, that he had been thinking that he only had value and worth in the world to the extent that he was successful. In other words, his castle wall was fame and success. And he saw it. I mean, you could see him see it. There's that moment where it's just like you see the light come on. And there was a beautiful moment where he got younger. His face got really calm and his eyes brightened and he came to life. Because the life force wants to come through us. It's just sometimes we don't make much space for it. And he came to life, and then I watched it shut down again, and he said, right, what technique can I use to get over this? And I said to him, I thought about it for a second, but I said to him, that's kind of like asking me, what are we going to do about Saddam Hussein sleeping with the rock star's wife? It never happened. It's not real. There's nothing we need to do about it. And up to a point, even though he couldn't see it, he got it. So let me read a story. This is how I was going to finish. I'll finish with a story. That's why these books made it up here. See if I can find it here in a relatively quick feeling. If not, I'll make it up again. Here we go. Imagine you're dreaming the most incredibly vivid dream of your life, began the teacher. In the dream, you seem to be some sort of an adventurer. And each adventure brings with it new challenges and creative solutions. You experience many wonderful things and some not so wonderful. You come to realize that in your dream, anything is possible. On one of your adventures, you encounter a very high wall. So you imagine yourself a rope and you climb to the top. In another, you're falling off a cliff, but before you reach the ground, you begin to fly. Eventually, you begin to look forward to each new adventure. Until one time, for no apparent reason, everything seems to go wrong. It's dark, so dark that you cannot see your hand before your face. Even before you can hear or see anything, you sense danger. Strange and uncomfortable sounds begin crawling out from the depths of your imagination and coming closer. Cautiously, you strike a match. Everywhere you look, you're surrounded by the most hideous creatures you have ever seen. You try to run, but your legs will not move. You try to scream, but no sound will come out. Everything you've learned up to this point seems to abandon you, and the likelihood of a hideous death surrounds you. What would you do? The student seemed lost in thought for many moments, and the teacher could see a range of fearful emotions play across her face as she lived the scenario fully in her mind. Suddenly, without warning, she opened her eyes and began to laugh. I know what I would do, the student said. I would wake up. Thank you for your time.